After giving birth, I gained a lot of weight, and my husband didn't like it so much that he left me for another woman, leaving the small children behind. But only when I lost the extra weight did he come crawling back to me. The moment I opened the door, my ex-husband stood there, holding a bouquet of roses. His expression carried a mixture of regret and hesitation, as if expecting forgiveness to come easily. He had once walked away without looking back, but now he was here again, hoping to undo the past before I could react. The children spotted him and ran straight into his arms. Their excitement filled the air, their small hands clutching onto him like he had never left. Watching them embrace him so effortlessly stirred something deep inside me, anger, resentment, and a lingering sadness I had worked so hard to bury. I remained still, gripping the doorframe, trying to suppress the emotions rushing through me. This was the man who had abandoned me when I needed him most, the man who had turned away as I struggled through one of the hardest periods of my life. And yet, he had returned, as if expecting things to fall back into place. His return stirred memories I had long tried to suppress. My pregnancy had been difficult, filled with complications that left me bedridden for weeks. The weight gain was rapid, unavoidable, and with each pound, his patience thinned. What started as subtle remarks turned into outright criticism. He barely looked at me the same way, and when he did, it was with disappointment. Arguments became routine. He compared me to women who had never been through childbirth, pointing out how effortlessly they maintained their figures. One in particular, the neighbor, always perfectly put together, always slim, always cheerful, became the standard he held over me. The way he spoke about her, the way his eyes lingered whenever she was around, made it clear I was no longer what he wanted. Then, the moment that shattered everything. I had suspected something for a while, but when I walked in on them together, any lingering hope I had was gone. There was no need for explanations, no words that could undo what I saw. He didn't even try to deny it. The marriage ended that day. He left without a second thought, moving in with her soon after, leaving me alone with our children. The weight he had resented stayed with me for a long time, but so did the pain of knowing I had never been enough for him. Now, after everything, he was back, standing on my doorstep, hoping to rewrite the past after he left. Survival became my only priority. With 2 small children depending on me, there was no time to grieve the marriage or dwell on my self-image. Every day was a battle: late nights soothing crying babies, early mornings preparing meals, endless exhaustion weighing down my body. The loneliness was constant, but the resentment fueled me. Money was tight. The expenses piled up while I juggled work and childcare. There was no one to share the burden, no partner to step in when things became overwhelming. He had walked away clean, free to start a new life with her, while I was left to rebuild everything from scratch. The weight he had criticized stayed with me for months, a reminder of everything he despised. But eventually, something shifted. I stopped trying to shrink myself for a man who had abandoned me. The workouts weren't about pleasing someone else anymore. They became a release, a way to reclaim control over my body and my life. The transformation was slow but steady. My confidence grew as the weight dropped, but more importantly, so did my sense of self-worth. I had been discarded as if I were nothing, yet here I was, standing stronger than ever now. He was back, standing in front of me, and for the first time, I saw him for what he was. Someone who had only loved me when it was convenient for him. Seeing him again brought back emotions I thought I had buried. He looked at me differently now, scanning me from head to toe, as if searching for the woman he had once dismissed. His absence had forced me to rebuild myself, and now he seemed to realize what he had lost, but the children saw none of this. To them, he was still their father. They clung to him, their small voices filled with excitement, their innocent joy oblivious to the pain he had caused. It wasn't their fault, they had missed him. While I had carried every hardship alone, they had only known the absence, not the reasons behind it. He stepped forward as if expecting a warm welcome, but I remained still. His choices had consequences, and I had spent too long suffering because of them. For months, I had been forced to accept my reality, struggling to provide, to heal, to move forward while he built a new life with someone else. Now, when I had finally found peace, he returned, expecting a place in the life he had abandoned. The decision loomed over me. If I rejected him, my children would lose the father they had longed for. But if I let him back in, I would be forcing myself into a life of doubt, of reliving the betrayal, of questioning if I was only worthy now because I looked different. He had left me when I was at my lowest. And now, when I had risen without him, he wanted to come back, but I wasn't the same woman he had walked away from for years. He had dictated the terms of our relationship. His love was conditional, his presence unreliable. When I had needed him most, he had chosen to leave. Now, he was standing in front of me, acting as if his return was inevitable, as if I had been waiting for him to come back. The weight loss wasn't for him. The strength I had built wasn't for him. Every struggle, every tear, every sleepless night had led me to this moment, and none of it was because I had hoped for his approval. I had done it for myself, for the woman who had been left to pick up the pieces while he started over with someone else. Yet here he was, believing a bouquet of roses could undo the damage. The children were still wrapped around him, looking up at him with the same trust they had before he left. Their world was simple. They had a father again. They didn't understand the pain he had caused, the way he had walked away so easily. They didn't see the nights I had spent crying after putting them to bed, the exhaustion that came with doing everything alone. To them, he was just Dad, someone who had been missing but had now returned, but I knew better. He was not here for them. If he had cared, he never would have left them behind in the first place. I had spent years doubting myself, wondering if I had driven him away, if my body, my struggles, my exhaustion had been too much for him. But I had learned the truth the hard way. His love had never been unconditional. The moment I no longer fit into his ideal, he had discarded me. He had run toward someone he deemed more desirable, someone who hadn't carried his children, someone who hadn't struggled the way I had. Now, when I was finally whole again, when I had worked through the pain and rebuilt my life, he had the audacity to return. He thought he could walk back into the home he had abandoned, that I would be grateful for his remorse, that the past could be erased with a simple apology, but the past was real. The suffering was real. And so was the strength I had built without him. I had been left with a choice, to forgive him and bring him back into our lives, or to stand firm in the life I had built without him, but the truth was, the choice had already been made. The day he walked out, he had made it for me. There had been a time when I would have done anything to keep our family together. When I begged him to see me, to hear me, to understand what I was going through. I had carried our children, had endured the physical toll of pregnancy, the long nights of exhaustion, the sacrifices that came with being a mother. But none of that had mattered to him. He had measured my worth by the number on the scale, by the way my body had changed, by the stretch marks and the exhaustion in my eyes. He had looked at me and seen someone who no longer fit his expectations. He had compared me to a woman who had never carried his children, someone who had the time to maintain a perfect figure, who didn't have the responsibilities I did, and when I had confronted him, when the truth had finally come out, he hadn't even fought to keep our marriage. He had left easily, as if I was disposable, as if I had been nothing more than a phase in his life. The months after the divorce had been some of the hardest of my life. I had looked at myself in the mirror and seen a woman he didn't want. I had believed, for too long, that I wasn't enough. That if I had just been thinner, if I had just bounced back faster after pregnancy, if I had just done more, he wouldn't have left. But time had revealed the truth. It had never been about me. It had always been about him. His selfishness. His inability to love someone beyond the superficial. Now, standing in my doorway, he had returned because I no longer looked like the woman he had abandoned. Because I had shed the weight that he had deemed unworthy. But he didn't see the real change. He didn't see the woman who no longer needed his approval, who no longer longed for his love. He had expected desperation. He had expected relief. Instead, all he found was a woman who had moved on. The children were still clinging to him, talking excitedly, their voices filled with a joy I had not heard in so long. It made my heart ache, knowing that they had missed him, that they had spent nights asking why he wasn't there. He had never seen the tears they cried when they asked for their father. He had not been there to comfort them when they felt abandoned, but I had. I had been the one who stayed. I had been the one who dried their tears, who worked through exhaustion to make sure they never felt unloved. And now, after all these years, after all the suffering, he had come back, expecting forgiveness, expecting a place in our lives again. He had made his choice long ago. Now, it was my turn to make mine. The longer he stood there, the heavier the moment became. He looked expectant, as if waiting for me to invite him in, to let him step back into the life he had so easily discarded. The weight loss had changed his perception of me, but it hadn't erased what he had done. The children clung to him, their small hands grasping at his shirt, their excitement filling the air. They didn't know the depth of his betrayal. To them, he had simply been gone, and now he was back. But I knew better. Raising them alone had not been easy. The sleepless nights, the stress of juggling work and motherhood, the isolation, I had endured it all while he had played house with another woman. And when things didn't work out for him, he had the audacity to return, expecting to find his family waiting. He didn't deserve their love, not after what he had done. But denying them their father felt cruel. Even if he had been absent for so long. For a brief moment, I considered it. I thought about the life we had once shared, about the version of him I had loved, about the dreams we had built before they shattered. It would be easy to pretend, to let him back in for the sake of the children. But at what cost? If I let him stay, what message would that send? That he could abandon us when things got difficult and come back when it suited him? That betrayal could be erased by time and regret? That I had suffered alone for nothing? No, the strength I had built was real. The self-worth I had rediscovered was real. And this moment, this decision, would define the future I had fought so hard to reclaim. He had left me when I was at my lowest. He had made his choice, and now I was making mine. I stood firm, unmoving, letting the silence stretch between us. He still held the bouquet, his grip tightening as he waited for me to say something, anything, that would give him hope. But there was nothing left to say. The children were still clinging to him, excited, unaware of the weight of this moment. They saw their father and wanted him back. But they didn't see the years of struggle, the nights I had spent alone, the pain of realizing that the man I had loved had chosen someone else over us. He had only returned because I had changed. He had only wanted me back now that I resembled the woman he had once desired. But I knew better. If I let him in, it would only be a matter of time before something else made me unworthy in his eyes. He had proven that his love was conditional, fleeting. I took a deep breath and made the choice I should have made the moment he left. Without a word, I stepped forward, gently pulling the children away from him. They resisted at first, confused, but I held them close, reassuring them without speaking. Then, I reached for the door. His face changed as he realized what was happening. The confidence wavered, replaced by something else, panic, maybe even regret. But it was too late for that. I shut the door. There was no need for explanations, no room for second chances. He had walked away when I needed him most, and now I was doing the same. But unlike him, I wasn't leaving anyone behind. I turned to my children, running my fingers through their hair as they looked up at me, waiting for answers. They didn't understand now, but one day they would. One day, they would see that love should never be earned through suffering, that some people only come back when it's convenient for them. And most importantly, they would see that I had chosen myself. The sound of his footsteps fading away was the final confirmation that I had made the right choice. I had fought too hard to rebuild my life. I wasn't going to let him tear it down again.